Let's talk to Andy Staples about Ohio State, Texas, and Colorado. Let's go. It's the #1 college football show. What's up, kinfolk? Welcome to the #1 college football show. I am your host, RJ Young. Thank you for watching on the Fox Sports app, YouTube, or listening wherever you get your podcast. Today on the show, I am pleased to have a longtime favorite, first-time guest in Andy Staples, who hosts a daily show over on On3 at 8 a.m. Eastern Standard Time. Andy, you are a much better man than me doing a morning radio show, because I once did a morning radio show, and I never wanted to do it again. So thank you so much for taking time this afternoon to talk with us.
I am learning to become a morning person, RJ. I was the fill-in guy at SiriusXM for 8 years, so I would bounce from like the morning show to the midday to the afternoon, and I always hated that morning. You get up so early, and it's like, what are we doing? I have to have energy now? But now that it is every day, I've actually figured it out. And this idea of having, because I've been, I started as purely a sports writer, so my schedule was going into midnight. Like, you stop working at midnight, basically. And this idea of afternoons and evenings actually being able to do things, it's very foreign to me, but I kind of like it.
I kind of see what you're getting at, but as a man who still does most of his writing at 2:30 in the morning, it's just not gonna. It's not gonna be my deal. It's not gonna be my deal. Plus, to the sports writer point, we cover games at night, right? And I'm thinking about it from the standpoint of what big games are coming on this season, and how many of those games are stacked throughout the day. Like, we got Big Noon at Fox.
Yeah, we got to thank Fox for giving us Big Noon, the gift of Big Noon. Because remember what noon college football used to be? It's like you got the end of game day. So they just, Lee Corso's just put the head. I now realize I'm talking about another network. But this was before your excellent pregame show on Fox had even started. So, the head goes on. And then all of a sudden, you go to a very sleepy Ryan Field in Evanston, Illinois, where Illinois and Northwestern are about to kick it off in front of friends and family, and even the announcers sound bored. But now we get Big Noon. So now we're going to get one of the biggest games in the country on Fox at noon, and the competition has tried to counter program. So we actually have multiple good games at noon.
Yes.
Which I appreciate as an old man.
That's what, man, look, at Oklahoma, it was always a thing, right? Because at Oklahoma, that's at 11 a.m. kickoff, which means that we don't do any tailgating. And we've been driving up, if you're coming from, say, Tulsa, which is 2 hours to Norman, you're up at about 5, right, for an 11 a.m. kick. You want a 2:30 game, right? That's what you want. That's what everybody seems to want if they're going to games. But what I have to remind people is that these games are not played in front of 84,000 people alone. They're played in, sometimes, if you're Colorado, 10 million people. And you can capture 10 million people at 11 a.m. You get that. Then what we had with CBS and the SEC, I'm curious to see how that goes, get your take on that. And then, of course, we get our nightcaps later on. But I brought up Big Noon because Texas, Michigan is on the schedule this year, right? And for the first time in 3 years, Michigan got to play somebody in a non-conference. And I'm curious, off top, do you think that Steve Sarkisian is right with his assessment? Because it kind of terrifies me because I can't see the flaw in the logic. We're Georgia before Georgia became Georgia.
I think that's a pretty accurate sentiment. Now, I probably need to see them develop a few more generations of D linemen, but Byron Murphy and T'Vondre Sweat going from what they were to what they became is pretty good proof of concept. Now, Bo Davis, the guy who did it, has gone off to LSU. Right. But if you look at Sark, because my biggest issue with Texas over the last decade was you lose games you're not supposed to lose. You kind of sleepwalk through some, and you get beat when you're not supposed to get beat, and you don't make NFL players anymore. Well, they just had 11 guys drafted, and it wasn't smoke and mirrors. They're legit dudes. Kelvin Banks, their left tackle, is going to be a first-round draft pick next year. DJ Campbell, who's in that same class, who's starting at guard now, he's an NFL guy. You look across the field, they've got dudes everywhere now. And so I don't worry about it. Like, they have fixed the problems that caused me the concerns about Texas. I'd really go into this season looking at them like, yeah, you should compete for the national title. You should compete for the SEC title. And like, going to Michigan, this is a great first test. Michigan's got a lot of talent, but they also have a lot of holes to fill. They have a lot of spots to make up. They're going to put inexperienced guys like their offensive line. I'm not worried about Michigan's offensive line. Ultimately, I think it's going to be good. I think they're going to be able to run the ball very effectively because they've recruited well, and Sharon Moore has done a great job building and having depth on that offensive line. So those guys are going to be fine, but they are going to be very early in their time as contributors when they're playing the Texas Longhorns, who are quite a bit more experienced. Like, even though you lose Byron Murphy and Tavondre Sweat, Alfred Collins and Malcolm Broughton were playing a bunch. So they're going to be they're going to know what they're doing and be very accustomed to dealing with dudes like you're going to be sending at them.
I'm jumping there real quick because Alfred Collins is that dude that could not give me a good 3-point stance to save his life out of high school, and he's developed into a dude. And then Vernon Broughton has looked the part forever. And then, Pete Kwiatkowski, that's the underrated part for me, is they have 4 years of continuity on the coaching staff, save, I believe, their offensive line coach, right? Jeff Choate's over at Nevada. So
no. Jeff Choate was the linebackers coach. Kyle Flood is the O-line coach, former Rutgers coach. And then they lost Bo Davis to LSU. But again, I do think, because you always wonder with these guys who go through the Nick Saban rehabilitation program, what do they take from Saban? Do they take the right things? Or even the ones who didn't go through the I got fired and then I went through it, like Jeremy Pruitt, who came up through the Saban system, didn't take the right things from Nick Saban. Sark seems to have taken,
exactly. I was going to say, he's got as many hits as he's got misses on that one. So it's real hard. But
Sark seems to have taken all the right things. He seems to understand. Now, a lot of it is just at this point taking the right Alabama players, like Isaiah Bond and Amari Niblack. I think are going to fit right into that offense. Like Niblack, if you were looking for somebody to replace Jatavian Sanders physically, that's the perfect person.
They have been so terribly blessed at that position at tight end in ways that I think are undersold because they've been so dynamic at wide receiver, right? Like they can do most of what they want. And then the backfield, you happen upon a Jonathan Brooks when you expect CJ Baxter to be the guy. But the question that I think that many people want answered is Quinn Ewers going to be healthy for the entire year? Or are we going to get the Arch Manning experience and we're going to call that dude not Quinn Ewers, but Wally Pipp?
So Quinn Ewers has not been healthy for an entire season in his 2 seasons as a starter. Correct. So I have no reason in a season that you expect, if you're Texas, to go 16 or 17 games. Are we sure he's going to be healthy? Probably not. But guess what? You got one of the best backups in the country. And I am curious if Arch does wind up coming in, would he wind up staying in? Because last year you had Malik come in and they almost lost to Kansas State. And that is the danger when you have a backup quarterback in the game. The year before they had to play Hudson Card. I think they feel a lot more comfortable now if they've got to play Arch if Quinn gets hurt. But I am curious what happens if we do get a taste of Arch, because I got to be honest, Quinn's the one part of this whole thing that I'm not entirely sold on. That was the reason when I was picking the Sugar Bowl last year, I picked Washington to win because I had more faith in Michael Penix Jr. than I had in Quinn. And I'm not saying Quinn's a bad quarterback. I'm just saying the level you've got to play at to win a national championship is extremely high. The bar is high, and you're going to be playing against some really good dudes. And so is he going to take that next step? Is he going to become like a first-round draft pick at quarterback, which he certainly has all the tools for? He has the arm talent, but can he put it all together, and can he stay healthy, to your point, because it hasn't happened yet?
I don't doubt the talent. I don't think any of us have ever doubted talent. That's why he's a number 1 overall recruit at the time, right? And he's able to go to Ohio State, take advantage of that deal, come back home. Then you get another number 1 and a guy who is a wet dream for coaches and old donors alike. I don't want anything. Don't even put me in the video game that everybody wanted to be in, because I don't care. All I want to do is play ball. My question going into the spring was, can that dude actually play? Because, no disrespect to Isidore Newman or any of the folks that do the very hard work of giving a rating, right? Scouting talent. But I watched that dude at Texas in the spring game, and I said, oh no, he's as good as they say he is, or at least in that setting he is. So I no longer doubt his talent. So if you're Quinn Ewers, and you know that's behind you, this is probably your best shot to A, go win a national championship, probably your last shot, and you're doing everything you can to stay healthy. I'm also asking this question. I'm asking earnestly. If you're Steve Sarkisian, what are the questions that you need to answer if Arch says, why am I not playing? If he ever changes that tune. I don't expect him to, because it seems like his granddaddy's running that whole operation over there, and they got the company line. But do you ever wonder, what if he changes his mind?
I don't, because they've been so steadfast, and all of his actions have suggested that he's cool with this. And remember, most quarterbacks who are that level of recruit would not be cool with this. They would have bounced in the transfer portal already. This was clearly the plan all along. And it's interesting because a lot of, and you know, you cover enough quarterbacks and you understand kind of where they're coming from. Like, raising a quarterback is exceptionally expensive in terms of money, in terms of resources, in terms of time. So if you're a parent who has raised a quarterback who wound up getting a D1 scholarship, you are getting a little antsy when you don't necessarily see the path to the starting job within a year or so. The Mannings aren't going to feel that way. They don't have to worry about that. And not just the money piece of it, but Archie's been an NFL quarterback. Peyton's been an NFL quarterback. Eli's been an NFL quarterback. Cooper has seen all this up close. They understand not starting at Texas this year will not keep Arch from becoming an NFL quarterback. It won't change anything for him on that front. If he's going to be one, he's going to be one. And so I think that's why you've seen this measured approach that you really don't see from most quarterbacks who were recruited at that level. You do see it some. Like Carson Beck at Georgia is a good example. He didn't start until year 4 at Georgia. But most quarterbacks, because they've put in all this time, their parents have put in all this money, they're looking for the spot to play right now.
I would be. And I mean, that's no shade, right? I would want to see my kid play too, especially if I thought my kid had an opportunity. But to your point about raising a quarterback and it being expensive, I kind of want to transition from Texas to another very big story and a very big quarterback in Shedeur Sanders at Colorado. Because the thing that I've been trying to stress to everybody who would listen, it's documented Coach Prime all the way back to Jackson State, getting the job, how he got that job. It goes back to him he was at Pee Wee watching his boys get coached, saw it was awful, and decided I probably should go do this so that my kids don't get hurt. And he has coached football for the last 20 years, but he's also coached his kids at every stop. And now we're at a moment where it is getting ready and time for Shedeur to cash in on this. Now, the point that I raised that I get some pushback on is offensive line was booty. We know that, right? Gave up 50 sacks, but you can't get the quarterback's back broken and expect me to feel good about anything you're doing in this offensive line. They got Phil Lodeholt. They got one of my guys. So knowing what Prime has had, right, and what he's in position to try to do, what do you think his intentions are for the quarterback when his quarterback is quite literally the most bankable player on the roster?
That's the part I worry about. Because you look at the offensive line, and look, they signed Jordan Seaton, who was the #1 offensive line prospect in the country. They lost their starting left tackle from last year to the portal, probably because Jordan Seaton came in looking ready to play and to start. But I don't see a lot of depth there. I don't see a lot of, you look at who they took out of the portal. They had some guys that were somewhat well thought of in the portal. But let's be real here. There weren't a lot of all-American type offensive linemen in the portal because their teams paid to keep them. And so I don't know that Shedeur is going to be that much better protected. And remember, you're also switching offenses. Last year, you're in that Sean Lewis offense, which is it's the veer and shoot. It's the old Art Briles Baylor offense where you're catching the ball, you're throwing it pretty quick. It is protecting you from not having a great offensive line. And he still got sacked a bunch. This one, a little more old school, requires a little more time. Now, if you can run the ball, then perhaps it's not as bad. The rush is not going to be as bad. The defenses are not going to pin their ears back and come after you. If your offensive line cannot generate a push up front and you are put in these weird bad down and distance situations, you're going to need time to throw. And that's where I worry, because I don't know that group protecting Shedeur is going to be all that much better than the one he had the year before. And if it isn't better and the plays take longer to develop, that's not a good recipe.
I'm curious about the offensive line, but to your point, I'm more curious about the depth behind the offensive line, because you and I have seen enough depth charts to see that the left guard is also the backup center, is also the backup right guard. And I never like looking at those depth charts, but they are what they are, right? You know what you got. And I'm looking at, say, them getting better. What's better at Colorado? Is it 20 sacks? I think you would take that. Is it 30 sacks? I think you would take that too.
Yep.
But if you're running this offense where you're not going to get the ball out 3-step drop, you're not running anything like a West Coast, right, where you're going to try to protect him and everybody knows what the situation is and go with the ball where I tell you to go with the ball. I'm also looking at this, can you run the ball? To your point. Now, it feels like Friday Night Lights when they say we ain't got no running backs, because Alton McCaskill's gone, right? Didn't get much, but
he only played 4 games last year. So I have no, like, they're bringing in Dallin Hayden.
Right.
They're bringing in Trey Amos. They've got some guys who can run the ball. You know, Dallin Hayden, when he got a chance to run it at Ohio State, did okay.
Yes. It's more about what you're letting go and not necessarily what you're bringing in. Because to your point, everybody wants to come and go, but I guess what I'm focused on in that backfield is continuity. And
I'm with you in terms of not just the backfield. This is the whole team. So the part that concerns me, and the Colorado fans have been very mad at me on my show of late, because I am now one of the haters. I have gone from being a big cheerleader to one of the haters, because when Deion came in, I thought, okay, here's a guy who can open doors that other people can't open, who's going to be able to recruit better than most coaches relative to the level of school he's at. And you saw that somewhat. But then you saw him wholesale exchange the whole roster in the transfer portal, which in year one, I'm fine with. I get it. That's a 1-11 team. You want to flush that roster? You want to bring in new guys? Great. But it feels like everybody who was pretty much a backup last year, they flushed again and replaced with more guys from the transfer portal. I don't think that's how you build a team or build a roster. Like to your point about continuity in the backfield, I'm not sure there's continuity anywhere. Because if you have a couple of injuries, guess who's next? Some guy you just got out of the transfer portal. And if you look at who they got out of the transfer portal, like, they weren't getting the top guys in the transfer portal. Ole Miss was getting those. Miami was getting those. They were getting guys that maybe can play at that level, but we'll see.
I thought that what Colorado was going to be was much closer to what Miami has become, not necessarily what Ole Miss is or even Ohio State, which we'll talk about, but I expected them to add, not to trade, right? And that's the point that I think we're making.
That's the perfect description right there. Trading versus adding.
Knowing that and knowing what you and I both thought going into last year, right? I've seen this movie before, right? And we got to take it as it lay, or we got to play it as it lies, right? You went 4-8 doing this, and not for nothing, but we need to talk about Travis Hunter, who I think is truly great. Gonna go both ways, but I don't know about 100 snaps doing that. But here's my thing. It scared me to watch Alec Ayanmar beat him to death. It was not close. You know what I'm saying? Like, that's a guy you ought to take away. That is a guy that Deion would never have let catch a ball, let alone go for 294. Like, what are we doing here? And I wonder, some of this is being tired, maybe, but you're the number one player at your position, the number one player in your recruiting class. And I'm thinking, who is Alec Ayanmar? Now, he's a dude. We know this now.
He's a Canadian, man. Now, I only know because I did a story on him at my old job, because he's kind of the poster child for the post-pandemic, right? Coming out of the pandemic, first time anybody laid eyes on people in person after the pandemic. So he got all these offers at once, because he had been like, he'd gone to some boarding school in New England, because this is a guy, he purely, went from Canada to boarding school in New England to go to an Ivy League school. That was the whole point. And then he just blows up from a recruiting standpoint. I remember talking to him. He's looking at Notre Dame. I think Virginia Tech, Penn State had offered. And you knew, like, the second Stanford offered, he was taking it, because He was either going to an Ivy League school or Stanford. And that was that night, I remember, because Colorado was crushing them. Mm-hmm. And it's like, they're good to go. And then he blows up. I'm like, Alec Humidor, I wrote about this guy. And then completely forgot about the story. And here he's been at Stanford, and he's just blowing up. That was a wild situation. But, I think Travis Hunter is going to be fine. Mm-hmm. It is hard to play the amount of snaps he was playing. And remember, he had the bad hit on him in the Colorado State game. Like, mm-hmm. I don't have a problem with anything Travis Hunter does, because I think he's awesome. But I do wonder about the depth. Again, this is what we were talking about. What happens if he gets another, like that was a dirty hit in that Colorado State game. What happens if there's another hit like that where it takes you out for a couple of games? What's behind you? Is it somebody that you're really confident in? Is it somebody that you recruited out of high school and developed? Is it somebody that you just got out of the portal? Is it somebody that got out of the portal last year and maybe you developed a little bit? Well, like Omarion Cooper, who started for them after coming from Florida State, he put himself in the portal this past spring. He's back at Florida State. He just committed to them. So like you said, trading versus adding. And when you have some injuries, that's where you're going to wonder. And the other thing about Colorado, and this is the Colorado fans don't like it when I say this either, and maybe they're right and maybe I'm wrong, but I don't think I'm wrong on this. They think that going to the Big 12 is a serious step down in competition from the Pac-12. It's going to be much easier now that Oregon and Washington are gone. Here's the thing. Oregon and Washington are gone, and there is no version of last year's Oregon and Washington in this year's Big 12. The problem is there's a whole bunch of USC and Utah and Arizona, and in fact, actual Utah and actual Arizona, but that level of team that can beat anybody on a given day or could lose on a given day. There's a whole lot of that in the Big 12. Like the Big 12, we're doing this series on my show called Ceiling and Floor. And like the SEC, you've got these teams at the top where their ceiling is college football playoff and their floor is like 9-3 or 8-4. Basically, the entire Big 12, the ceiling is going to be 11-1 and the floor is going to be 3-9 because they're very evenly matched. Like this is not going to be easy, and it's going to be a grind.
It's very true. I was asked to basically put these 16 teams in an order, and I was like, man, I can make an argument for 12 teams. Like just generally speaking, right? West Virginia, I think, is a great example. Right. West Virginia is the kind of team that popped up with 9 wins. Everybody's like, wait, what? When did that happen? Right.
And brought most of the important players back other than maybe Zach Frazier.
In a year where Neil Brown had to have it and he knew he had to have it. Right. So he's really good in this position. Now he's going to be, walking with his chest out, and one of my favorite guys in the business, but also indicative of what I think the Big 12 is, Lance Leipold in Kansas. They're on their way. Now they're not going to play a game at home, technically, because they're renovating in Lawrence.
RJ, can I put just a PSA? Because so Kansas, as you mentioned, is homeless. They're rebuilding their stadium, so they're going to play their Big 12 games at Arrowhead, where the Chiefs play. I think there's a corporate name that I'm missing in there, but they're going to play their 2 non-conference home games at Sporting KC Stadium, the little MLS stadium. The Kansas UNLV game in that little bandbox of a stadium is going to be a banger. Just watch, like Brennan Marion's go-go offense against Kansas. And I think, we think Jalen Daniels should be healthy and back and ready to go. Like that's going to be a fun one early season.
Well, see that Brennan's family, like we went to TU together, right? Come up together.
That's right. That's right.
Yeah. Those are my guys.
So you got old Mike Norvell stories too, right?
Man, don't I? When he's a GA. Yeah. Mike and I go back, Gus and I go back. But the thing about the UNLV thing that I can't quite pin down is Jaden Mayavas. He's at USC now.
Yeah.
Right. And he turned out to be the guy that actually made them go last year. Now, far be it from me, because Brennan's a better coach of quarterbacks than I am. Right. He made it work at Howard before he making it work at UNLV. But I think the bigger point of Colorado is going to be up against it week in and week out is real. I would never put North Dakota State on anybody's schedule. I just wouldn't do it.
I don't know that they're the North Dakota State of the last decade. David Braun, who is now Northwestern's coach, was their DC and was doing a great job there. I don't know that they are that. So I'm not as worried about them maybe beating Colorado. But like Colorado goes and plays Nebraska in week 2. If Nebraska doesn't turn the ball over 50 billion times before the first half ends, that's a much more competitive game last year. My guess is they won't do that. But Nebraska's defense is going to be nasty this year. So you better be able to stop somebody, because we don't know what their offense is going to look like. Dylan Riley will look good in the spring game. We'll see. But that defense is going to make it very tough to score on them.
Well, speaking of trading out, right? Robert Livingston, Charles Kelly. I don't think that's a 1-for-1 myself. But it also brings me around to this Big Ten conundrum that I'm having, right? So I want to talk about Ohio State with the time we have left. Mm-hmm. And I looked at this roster and what Ryan Day has built and what Gene Smith allowed and what the foundation, 1870 and IL collectives have been able to do. And I go, oh my God, I just built this team. It's on the video game though, but I built it. You know what I'm saying? So I'm looking at this and tell me if I'm wrong here, because it feels like if you're ever going to be the 2019 Ohio State Buckeyes, right? Or 2020, this is the team to do it. Am I wrong here?
Well, this is the team. This is the 2015 Ohio State Buckeyes. Mm-hmm. But remember what happened with the 2015 Ohio State Buckeyes. They didn't win the national title. The 2014 team did, and then the 2015 team brought back all these people, had all these expectations, and didn't win it. This team is very similar, and I know Ohio State fans probably don't like to hear this, very similar to last year's Michigan team in terms of how many people could be in the NFL right now but decided to run it back. I mean, let's count the ways just on defense. Jack Sawyer, JT Tuimoloau, they've got
Denzel Burke.
Denzel Burke could be right. He's in his 4th year. Lathan Ransom could be in the NFL right now. And then you have Caleb Downs comes in from Alabama. Probably the single best. It's funny because either Caden Proctor or Caleb Downs are the best transfers, but Caden Proctor doesn't count anymore because he's back at Alabama. So Caleb Downs, probably the single best addition any team made out of the transfer portal, not just because of what Caleb Downs can do. And remember, he had 100 tackles as a true freshman at Alabama last year. He is a true rover safety, like basically Brian Urlacher at New Mexico, can do it all.
There's the pool.
What he also does is allows Sonny Styles to move to linebacker where he always should have been. They were playing Sonny Styles at safety to get their best 11 on the field. Now Ohio State's best 11 includes him where he should be. That's a scary prospect.
Yeah, man. I'm thinking about Tylee Williams there too. It's up and down the board on that side of the ball, but also on the other side of the ball. Now, this is where I think it gets fun because Ryan Day has been teasing, giving up the play calling privileges. Bill O'Brien, we were kind of like, really? And then Chip Kelly, we were like, oh yeah, actually, right? It feels good now. It felt like he was forcing it with Bill O'Brien. Now it feels like it's something that everybody's on board with him doing with Chip Kelly. But my question is, who's the starting quarterback? And
Will Howard.
Does it matter?
It's Will Howard.
Okay.
Yeah, it's Will Howard, and I think Chip Kelly's going to very much enjoy working with Will Howard. I think, Chip Kelly did a good job with Dorian Thompson-Robinson at UCLA. You look at the skill sets of Dorian Thompson-Robinson and Will Howard, it's fairly similar. They're both fairly mobile guys, decent arms,
one
good
guy's
leaders,
6'5", 240. That's the difference. That one guy's Cam Newton. I know I'm being loose with this, but until you see Will Howard up close,
he's huge. Yeah.
And I've never seen Chip Kelly with that guy.
Yeah. And the thing is, look at the backs. So you got Travion Henderson, who's a home run threat. You add Quinshon Judkins to that mix. And I realize everybody's all in on Quinshon Judkins. I thought he was good at Ole Miss. I don't think Ole Miss is going to miss him all that much because they had a pretty deep stable of backs. But I think in terms of him being the second back at Ohio State with the rest of that offense, that's terrifying because Travion Henderson can break a play at any time. And then, RJ, you know this because you follow recruiting. The world hasn't seen Jeremiah Smith yet. Those of us in the family have seen Jeremiah Smith.
Oh my God. So excited. No, please give me your impressions of the dude that might, God, I can't believe I'm saying this. You let Marvin Harrison Jr. go, who many of us think is, regardless of position, the best player in this NFL draft. And you look at Jeremiah Smith and you go, oh my God, it's not another one. It's a guy that can do things that I'm not sure Marvin Harrison Jr. could do.
Right. It's possibly a better version. And ready to do it right away. Because remember, Marvin needed some time.
Right.
Now, most places he would have just jumped on the field and played right away. They had Chris Olave and Garrett Wilson when he got there. So it's a little bit different story. But he needed some seasoning. Listen, Ohio State has really good receivers: Emeka Egbuka, Cornell Tate, maybe Julian Fleming doesn't hit the portal.
Brandon Ennis.
Right. If Jeremiah Smith isn't coming in.
Correct.
So this is a guy who immediately announces himself as, I'm the best receiver here. He lost his black stripe. The Ohio State does the thing. Urban Meyer started this, where they put the black stripe down your helmet, and when they ceremonially remove the black stripe, you are now officially a member of the team. Jeremiah Smith lost his after 4 practices. Percy Harvin didn't do that.
Mark Pantoni said it best. He's like, I don't want to ever put this on a dude that, just got here, but it's really difficult for me not to say that is the most ready-made freshman we've ever seen. And I trust Mark to the moon. Like, I follow that dude into hell with a squirt gun when we're talking about recruiting. And that gave me permission, right? It gave me permission.
Absolutely.
To be excited about this guy.
That's a guy who's seen a lot of 5-stars show up and either show out or wash out. And if he's not going to say that lightly. He's definitely not going to say that lightly.
Last question for you before we get out of here. What constitutes success for Ohio State in 2024?
A national championship. Everything else is a failure. And it's okay. That is okay. I think Michigan was in the same boat last year with all those guys coming back. Alabama's in that boat a lot of years. Georgia's in that boat every year now. It's okay to say it like that. Ohio State fans think of it that way every year anyway. This time, you actually have permission within the team to think of it that way, because they've got probably the best roster in the country. They have everything they need.
And they need to get it done. No gold pants for this group. No Big Ten championship for this group. No national championship for this group. It's all out there for them, and I think that is going to free them up to just go hell's bells for the entire season. So excited. Andy Staples, who hosts Andy Staples on 3 every day at 8 a.m. Eastern Standard Time on the YouTubes. Andy, thank you so much for taking time to join us here on the #1 College Football Show.
My pleasure, RJ. Thank you for having me.
And that is going to do it for this episode of the #1 College Football Show. We'll be back on Thursday with our UFL show. #1 College Football Show leads the screening are Jack Coakley and Torrin Westfall. They make us better in the film room. Additional support from Kiara Santana and Jim Cunningham put the special in our special teams. Producer Javion Duncan makes sure the recruits and the rivals see the cake we bake. Technical director Gabe Sable sends in the signal. Senior producer Catherine Cordaji sees the entire field from the booth. Lead producer Tyler Wojak calls the plays from the sideline, and the play snaps on my clap. We're back on Thursday. Till then, stay low. Keep those feet driving. Doses.